voice of the people. I am sitting in as your interim host, sitting in the seat of my brother King Jaff, sitting in the seat of my brother King Jaff. Have my amazing sister Q on the ones and two,
Good morning. You won't hear from me much, but I'm here.
and I am the intellectual gangster, your brother Donnie, professor, male advocate, masculinity coach, and lover, lover of his people. I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity of being allowed to be in your homes or your cars or wherever you may be listening to this broadcast. It's a great honor to be a representative of 99.1 The Jams, The Bird. This is your ride. This is your vehicle. This is your history. Think we have a caller.
Hello.
Outstanding. This is your community. This is your voice. And we are the voice of the people. We like to begin every broadcast by saying all power to the people. Why do we say all power to the people? Because we understand that history is made only by the people. History is not made by kings. History is not made by queens. History is not made by presidents. History is not made by senators. History is not made by congressmen. History is made by the people through the people's efforts to wake and work every day to produce and to reproduce life. For that purpose, we say that all power, all power is for, should be for, and should be in the hands of none other than the people. So we say all power to the people. This morning, May 18th, 2023, is a very special day. It's a day of commemoration, and the commemoration of two international freedom fighters for human rights. Their birthday being tomorrow, May 19th.
Which you'll talk about tomorrow again.
The first of those two is none other than the Honorable El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Baba Omowale, known to the world as Malcolm X. The 19th of May, 2023, would have been his 93rd birthday. Let's remember our brother, let's remember our teacher, and let's remember what he taught us. The other birthday to be celebrated with international prestige is the birthday of the Honorable Ho Chi Minh, leader of the Viet Minh and the Vietnam people's struggle for liberation against colonialism, first by the French, then by the Japanese, again by the French, and then by the U.S. Empire. It was the Honorable Ho Chi Minh and Yo Vinh Giáp who fought tirelessly for decades to free the people of Vietnam and as an example for the freedom of the people of the world. We stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters of Vietnam as they stood in solidarity for us and stand in solidarity for us and our freedom struggle in the new world. We would like to thank everyone for remembering, because in remembrance there's life. There's an African proverb that says, as long as someone is remembered, they will never be away from us. So we like to call into memory the same way that we call into memory from the call and response of our singing. We say a thing and then it is repeated. This is the African way of thinking. The African design for the Creator is called Ile Aye. Ile Aye. Why? Why Ile Aye? Because the word Ile, the statement Ile, as placed into the heavens, is given back in the return form of its reciprocal, Aye. African thought was always based in understanding that is in the interplay between the reciprocal and the initial that life is created. The reciprocal and the initial, the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, the call and the response. We must remember that when a people are persecuted, they will hide their culture from themselves, meaning they will put things that were once taught as cultural hallmarks and place these things in a hidden place so that they can be remembered through mystery systems. So, as we call the universe Ile Aye, we remember that the reciprocal is necessary for the completion. May 19th, the birthday of the freedom fighters. What were we given by both the Honorable Ho Chi Minh and Baba Omowale, Malcolm X? We were given a blueprint, a template for the creation of institutions. What do we mean when we say institutional creations? What is an institution? And how do institutions function to buttress and support freedom struggles? Institutions are social constructions that are purposed to outlive the individuals who created them. The Jesus movement of the first century would have died very quickly in its cradle had the institution of Christianity not been created. The Hebrew movement of roughly 4000 BC would have died out very quickly had the institution of what we call the Hebrew religion or Judaism not been created. The monotheist movement led by Muhammad of Arabia of 1400 years ago would have easily died out in the desert sands had not the institution of Islam been created. The anti-lynching movement that came out of the Niagara meeting in the early part of the 20th century would have died out like the blood that was shed throughout the country had not great minds met to create the NAACP. Institutions outlive their creators, and the aims and the goals of the institutions are the aims and the goals of their creators. The example left by Malcolm X was an example of a mobilizer and an organizer. The comparison is often made in this colonial culture that tells us that the colonial subjects, those who represent the ranks of the oppressed, can only have one hero. You have to choose. So much so that it bleeds over in its egregiousness into things like sport and play. You have to make a decision. You have to choose. Either you go with Booker T. Washington or Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, or either you go with Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois or the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, or you go with, as it's been plated for us, Malcolm X or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You either go with LeBron James or Michael Jordan. This type of dichotomy is meant for one purpose, and that is division. And it is not the African mathematical system of success that allows us to have division. Our system of success is inclusion. So as we approach the 21st century, we shake off the colonial idea that we have to choose one over the other. And instead of Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois, we choose Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois.
We can choose both.
Indeed. Instead of W.E.B. Du Bois or Marcus Garvey, we choose W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Instead of Malcolm X or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we choose Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because we are grounded in the understanding of call and response. We are grounded in the understanding
You have a
of
comment.
reciprocal.
They say we have a Venus mindset.
We have a Venus mindset.
Yes. I think. Wait, I can't see over here.
Well, comment
This is why I'm so far from the computer. My bad.
no problem at all. Commenter, please.
No, it's Brother John.
Okay, explain. Yes, sir, Brother John, please.
No. He didn't say Venus. He said
Versus. Yes, okay. Yeah, exactly.
It looked, so before you highlighted it, it looked like it. So yeah, there we go.
Well, thank you so very much, Brother John. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We do have a versus mindset.
Yes.
And in the versus mindset, there's nothing but division. Well, that isn't the kind of math that we know will take us into the future. Multiplication is the math that we'll use to take us into the future. Addition is the math that we'll use to take us into the future. If we're not getting God results, it's because we're doing the devil's mathematics. And we will not do that as a culture now in the 21st century. We also understand that there are motivators and there are organizers. There are mobilizers and there are organizers. And there are both. A mobilizer has the ability to awaken the consciousness of the masses, to invite the masses to see how their greatness can be applied and how their greatness can be reflected on the world stage. The mobilizer is the one who can speak to the soul of a man, far past his position, and invite that man to an image of himself that once was only a dream, that once was only a nightmare. The mobilizer has the ability, through charisma and command of the language, rhetorical prowess, and understanding, to lift someone out of their seat and make them move, to make them feel like they've been born again. This is the mastery of the mobilizer. You also have the organizer. The organizer has the gift of taking the energy created by the mobilizer and focusing that energy to tactile and tangible results via organizing that energy and placing it so that quantity can have a direct influence on quality. This is the organizer. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man of sublime intelligence, a fantastic genius of rhetoric and orator, a person who had the ability to connect very deeply with his audience and with his people. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a fantastic mobilizer.
I'm laughing because they were laughing at me, right? So here's a little secret. I need glasses and I don't wear them. So so maybe I need to pull them out.
Reality radio.
Yes, it is. But go ahead.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, in our loving assessment of our ancestor, was not a good organizer. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as a mobilizer, was able to pack Washington, D.C. with people in the hundreds of thousands. However, if you ask the average person who listened to our brother speak, how did it make you feel? They would tell you, it electrified me. But if you ask the average person, what did he say? They would struggle to understand. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a fantastic mobilizer. He was not a good organizer.
Can I ask why you say?
Well, I'll give you an example.
Okay, go ahead.
When the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was vying for a position with the Southern Baptist. Although he was the most influential, although he was the best choice, although he was the fire in the stove of Black Baptists, he could not win. He could not win the presidency of that organization, which is why the SCLC was formed. In fact, when he ran, he not only lost the election against another pastor named Jackson, but a melee broke out during the election and a man was killed. In a group of pastors, hundreds of pastors, a melee broke out and a man was killed during the election. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., being such a young man, had never focused on the power of building organizations. But that's contrasted by our brother, Malcolm X. Malcolm X's difference from Dr. King was that Malcolm was a mobilizer and an organizer. If you notice, the Poor People's Campaign was never able to fully get off when Dr. King was heading it. The SCLC, although it was extremely powerful when Dr. King was assassinated under the leadership of Ralph Abernathy, came apart and began to lose its political influence. The organizational prowess of Malcolm X, his gift of not just speaking to the people, preaching to the people, but teaching and organizing the people, allowed the organization that he was in as a representative, the Nation of Islam, to reproduce itself many times over in not only its representation of temples, but in its representation in the media. It was Brother Malcolm X who pioneered the phrase, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Why? Because he said that Mr. Muhammad, as he was known before, he was largely known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He said that a head of state, a person who represents the people in the United States, is given the title, the Honorable. This was so inculcated that we struggle to find a way to say the name Elijah Muhammad now without saying the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as if that was his birth name. His title was organized into his representation, and that representation was organized by Malcolm X. Malcolm X was also chief in the organization of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which state was the first national newspaper in the United States. Long before USA Today, there was Muhammad Speaks. But Muhammad Speaks newspaper came from the articles Mr. Muhammad Speaks carried in the black newspapers of the day. So it was Malcolm X and his knowledge from his lifetime of working as an organizer from his father and mother, who were organizers for Marcus Garvey's UNIA movement. It was his knowledge of being an organizer that set the pace for other groups that focused on organization, not just the Nation of Islam, but we know the Black Panther Party, we know the Black Liberation Army, we know the Republic of New Africa, we know the MOVE movement. We understand all of these movements being spin-offs of the organizational prowess given to us by Malcolm X. Organizations build institutions. Organizations alone build institutions. People can build movements, but organizations build institutions. This is something that should always be remembered as we look to the role of institutions in the building of liberation movements. In order to be organized, you have to be a part of an organization. And in order to build an institution, you have to have organized organization. This is why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as amazing as he is, not was. In the African mind, we don't speak in the past tense of people. People are because they are.
We have a caller.
Go ahead, caller.
Caller,
Q?
introduce yourself.
No.
Oh.
Don't put me on the air. I want to talk to you. Can you hear me?
I'm in my headphones.
Yes, I can hear you.
So, as we reflect on the beauty of the heart, the mind, and the soul that would have been 93 tomorrow, our brother, Baba Omawale, Malcolm X, then let's look to what is usually left out of the story. You know, the real history of things is often the missing pages of the current history of things. Let's take a walk back into time, into February of 1965. Let's look in the pocket of a jacket that's hanging in a closet of a home that is on fire. After securing Sister Betty Shabazz, who was pregnant at the time, and his tiny girls in February, freezing temperatures, Malcolm entered and braved the flames to reach forth and to grab a copy of the charter for the Organization of African American Unity. This charter was supposed to be presented on February 15th of 1965. However, that was the day that his house was firebombed. This charter, stayed with Malcolm and was supposed to be added in as an addendum chapter to the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. In fact, Alex Haley told Malcolm, yes, I will add this into the autobiography. Unfortunately, on February 21st of 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated. And Alex Haley, a former member of Naval Security or Naval Intelligence, seemed to forget to add the charter to the autobiography of Malcolm X. The tragedy being that when we finish reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, there are no marching orders. There is no program to build the institution of the OAAU, the Organization of African American Unity. But we have it now. Thanks to the fact that the Malcolm X papers have been digitized and the Malcolm X papers have been made available online, we now know what Malcolm wanted to tell us. And I today, on The Voice of the People, will briefly share with us Malcolm's words for us, our marching orders, what we should do as American Africans, people who he referred to as Afro-Americans. I won't change his words, but I will say whenever you hear Afro-American, just replace it with American Africans. These are Malcolm's words. Pledging unity, promoting justice, and transcending compromise. We, Afro-Americans, people who originated in Africa and now reside in America, speak out against the slavery and oppression inflicted upon us by this racist power structure. We offer to downtrodden Afro-American people courses of actions that will conquer oppression, relieve suffering, and convert meaningless struggle into meaningful action. Confident that our purpose will be achieved, we, Afro-Americans from all walks of life, make the following known. Establishment. Having stated our determination, confidence, and resolve, the Organization of African American Unity is hereby established on the 15th day of February 1965 in the city of New York. Upon this establishment, the Afro American people will launch a cultural revolution which will provide the means for restoring our identity that we might rejoin our brothers and sisters on the African continent, culturally, psychologically, economically, and share with them the sweet fruits of freedom from oppression and independence of racist governments. 1. The Organization of African American Unity welcomes all persons of African origin to come together and to dedicate their ideas, their skills, and lives to free our people from oppression. 2. Branches of the Organization of African American Unity may be established by people of African descent, wherever they may be and wherever they may have as an ideology, as long as they be descendants of Africa and dedicated to our one goal, freedom from oppression. 3. The basic program of the Organization of African American Unity, which is now being presented, can and will be modified by the membership, taking into consideration national, regional, and local conditions that require flexible treatment. 4. The Organization of African American Unity encourages active participation of each member, since we feel that each and every Afro-American has something to contribute to our freedom. Thus, each member will be encouraged to participate in the committee of his or her choice. 5. Understanding the differences that have been created amongst us by our oppressors in order to keep us divided, the Organization of Afro-American Unity strives to ignore or submerge these artificial divisions by focusing our actions and our loyalties upon one goal, freedom from oppression. These are the words of Malcolm X. Imagine if we were submerged, immersed, baptized in these words while we were in elementary school. To the same degree that we've heard and been submerged and been baptized and been immersed in the words, I have a dream. Suppose the first thing we were taught was that the differences between African people were all artificial and should either be ignored or submerged. We should see all African people as one people and understand that all African people have one aim, one goal, freedom from oppression. It is no mystery that this information was not made available to us. It is no mystery that many of you who are hearing this for the first time are hearing this for the first time. This is taking an idea and building from that idea an institution. Basic aims and objective. These are Malcolm's words. First, self-determination. We assert that we Afro-Americans have the right to direct and control our lives, our history, and our future, rather than to have our destinies determined by American racists. We are determined to rediscover our true African cultures, which were crushed and hidden for over 400 years in order to enslave us and keep us enslaved up to today. We, Afro-Americans, enslaved, oppressed, and denied by a society that proclaims itself the citadel of democracy, are determined to rediscover our history, promote the talents that are suppressed by our racist enslavers, renew the culture that was crushed by a slave government, and thereby to again become a free people. National unity. Sincerely believing that the future of Afro-Americans is dependent upon our ability to unite our ideas, our skills, our organizations, and institutions. We, the Organization of African American Unity, pledge to join hands and hearts with all people of African origin in a grand alliance by forgetting all of the differences that the power structure has created to keep us divided and enslaved. I'm going to read that one more time. These are the words of our brother, Malcolm X. We, the Organization of African American Unity, pledge to join hands and hearts with all people of African origin, with all people of African origin, in a grand alliance by forgetting all the differences that the power structure has created to keep us divided and enslaved. We further pledge to strengthen our common bond and strive toward one goal: freedom from oppression. The Basic Unity Program. These are the words of Malcolm X. The program of the Organization of Afro-American Unity shall evolve from 5 strategic points, which are deemed basic and fundamental to our grand alliance. Through our committees, we shall proceed in the following general areas. Take notes. General Area 1, restoration. In order to enslave the African, it was necessary for our enslavers to completely sever our communications with the African continent and the Africans that remained there. I'm going to read that one more time. Malcolm said, and I quote, "In order to enslave the African, it was necessary for our enslavers to completely sever our communications with the African continent and the Africans that remained there. In order to free ourselves from the oppression of our enslavers, then, it is absolutely necessary for the Afro-American to restore communications with Africa. Until Africa," these are my words, "until Africa is free, no African anywhere on the planet will be free, justified, or respected." Malcolm taught us that and said that it was essential that that connection was made. The Organization of African American Unity will accomplish this goal by means of independent national and international communication, newspapers, publishing, ventures, personal contacts, and other available communicative media. We, Afro-Americans, must also communicate to one another the truths about American slavery and the terrible effects it has on our people. We must study the modern system of slavery in order to free ourselves from it. We must search out all of the bare and ugly facts without shame, for we are still victims, still slaves, still oppressed. This is Malcolm talking about the value of history, the goal of history, the aims of history. Imagine being taught about this Malcolm, the Malcolm that wasn't reduced to the sloganeering of "by any means necessary." No, 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 no. Malcolm had gone past "by any means necessary." He had begun to define the means. The means are the building of institutions. And Malcolm knew this. Malcolm was bigger than the borders of the United States. Malcolm was bigger than the borders of the Western Hemisphere. Malcolm's message was an international African message. Sound like anybody else you know? Does this not sound like African internationalism? Does this not sound like revolutionary Pan-Africanism? Are we not endowed today with leaders who understand the message that Malcolm is placing before the world? Are we listening to those leaders? These are Malcolm's words. We must learn all that we can about ourselves, we will have to know the whole story of how we were kidnapped from Africa, how our ancestors were brutalized, dehumanized, and murdered, and how we are continually kept in a state of slavery for the profit of a system conceived in slavery, built by slaves, and dedicated to keeping us enslaved in order to maintain itself. This, brothers and sisters of our audience, the brothers and sisters who are following us on Facebook Live, the brothers and sisters who've invited us in your homes or in your cars or wherever you may be listening to this broadcast, this is true cultural revolution. It is less the man with the Molotov cocktail and more the man with the African history book. They go hand in hand, call and response, initial and reciprocal. Malcolm's words: we must begin to re-educate ourselves and become alert listeners in order to learn as much as we can about the progress of our motherland, Africa. Malcolm was not speaking to individuals who may identify as indigenous Americans, although they are the brothers and sisters of all indigenous people of the world. Malcolm is making a distinction, inasmuch as he's speaking as people and from people and about people who were the victims of the human trafficking and forced labor economy that we call today the slave trade. We must correct in our minds, Malcolm's words. We must correct in our minds the distorted image that our enslaver has portrayed to us of Africa, that he might discourage us from re-establishing communications with her and thus obtain freedom from oppression. Without a connection, my words, without a connection to Africa, African people have no long-term shot at freedom from oppression. If we can remember, as we ponder the idea of reparations, that to repair something is to restore it. And to restore something is to give back to it that which was taken from it. And the first thing taken from African people was the African continent. There can be no reparation without land appropriation. And this is appropriation without compensation. We will not compensate the colonizers for the land that they stole. But anything outside of African land, labor, and resources, nothing outside, rather, of African land, labor, and resources can be used to restore, to repair the theft of African land, labor, and resources. Absolutely nothing. Not a check, not an apology, and not anyone else's stolen land. You cannot pay Africans in land that you stole from indigenous Americans. You cannot repay Africans in land that you stole from indigenous Americans, my words. You took Africa from Africans, and Africa must be returned. And it will be returned by these means. Malcolm's words: reorientation. In order to keep the Afro-American enslaved, it was necessary to limit our thinking to the shores of America, to prevent us from identifying our problems with the problems of other peoples of African origin. This made us consider ourselves an isolated minority without allies anywhere. The Organization of African American Unity will develop in the Afro-American people a keen awareness of our relationship with the world at large and clarify our roles, our rights, and our responsibilities as human beings. We can accomplish this goal by becoming well informed concerning world affairs and understanding that our struggle is part of a larger world struggle of oppressed people against all forms of oppression. We must change the thinking of the African American by liberating our minds through the study of philosophies and psychologies, cultures, and languages that did not come from our racist oppressors. Provisions are being made for the study of languages such as Kiswahili, Hausa, and Arabic. These studies will give our people access to ideas and history of mankind at large and thus increase our mental scope. We can learn much about Africa by reading informative books and by listening to the experiences of those who have traveled there. But many of us can travel too. And many of us can go to the land of our choice and experience it for ourselves. The Organization of African American Unity will encourage the Afro-American to travel to Africa, to the Caribbean, and to other places where our culture has not been completely crushed by the brutality and ruthlessness of our oppressors. This is Malcolm in 1965 telling us to get our passports, to travel the world, to see, to allow our eyes to be opened to a new world of thinking, a world of African people that exists in Bogota, Colombia, that exists in Quito, Ecuador, that exists in Asunción, Paraguay, that exists in Havana, Cuba. A world of people that exists in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in Belize City, Belize, in Guatemala, Guatemala, in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, in San Salvador, El Salvador, in Managua, Nicaragua, in San Jose, Costa Rica, and in Panama, Panama. Malcolm is telling us not just to see the African world through the continent, but to use the continent as a basis to see the diaspora. He's telling us to go to St. John, to go to St. Vincent, to go to St. Croix, to go to Guadeloupe and Martinique and see African people, see African culture, understand what you're seeing in Caracas, Venezuela, when you see African enclaves in Suriname, in Guyana, in Canada, in Mexico, Veracruz. All of this, Malcolm says, all of this is us. Economic security. After the Emancipation Proclamation, when the system of slavery changed from chattel slavery to wage slavery, it was realized that the Afro-American constituted the largest homogeneous ethnic group with a common origin and common group experience in the United States. I'm going to say that again. After the Emancipation Proclamation, when the system of slavery changed from chattel slavery to wage slavery, it was realized that the Afro-American constituted the largest homogeneous ethnic group with a common origin and common group experience in the United States. And if allowed to exercise economic or political freedom, would in a short period of time own this country. Therefore, racists in the government developed techniques that would keep the Afro-American people economically dependent upon the slave master, the economic slaves, 20th century slaves, and might I add to that, Brother Malcolm, 21st century slaves. The Organization of Afro-American Unity will take measures to free our people from economic slavery. One way of accomplishing this will be to maintain a technician pool. Where did we see this before? Did we not see this in 2005 with the Millions More movement and the creation of the National Skills Bank? Did we not get this blueprint in 1965? Have we moved on it today? My words, my questions. A technician pool that is a bank of technicians. In the same manner that blood banks have been established to furnish blood to those who need it at a time, we must establish a technician bank. We must do this so that the newly independent nations of Africa can turn to us, who are their Afro-American brothers, for the technicians that they need now and in the future. Thereby, we will be developing an open market for the many skills we possess. And at the time, we will be supplying Africa with the skills that she can best use. This project will therefore be one of mutual cooperation and mutual benefit. As our hour closes, we want to take up point 5, self-defense. In order to enslave a people and keep them enslaved, Malcolm's words, their right to self-defense must be denied. They must be constantly terrorized, brutalized, and murdered. These tactics of suppression have been developed to a new high by vicious races whom the United States government seems unwilling or incapable of dealing with in terms of the law of this land. Before emancipation, it was the black man who suffered humiliation, torture, castration, and murder. Recently, our women and children, more and more, are becoming the victims of savage races whose appetite for blood increases daily and whose deeds of depravity seem to be openly encouraged by all law enforcement agencies. Over 5,000 Afro-Americans have been lynched since the Emancipation Proclamation, and not one murderer has been brought to justice. The Organization of African American Unity, being aware of the increased violence being visited upon the African American and in the open sanction of this violence and murder by the police departments throughout the country and the federal agencies, do affirm our right and obligation to defend ourselves in order to survive as a people. We encourage the Afro-Americans to defend themselves against the wanton attacks of racist aggressors whose sole aim is to deny us the guarantees of the United Nations Charter of Human Rights and the Constitution of the United States. I'm going to read that one more time. We encourage the African Americans to defend themselves against the wanton attacks of racist aggressors whose sole aim is to deny us the guarantees of the United Nations Charter of Human Rights and the Constitution of the United States, to include the Second Amendment. Malcolm didn't say that. This is my words. To include the Second Amendment.
The views expressed.
You cannot deny people their constitutional rights without denying them their Second Amendment rights. And anyone who wishes to take away your Second Amendment rights is someone who wishes to disenfranchise you as a member of the United States. They wish to make you a stateless person, because you can't be, there's no such thing as second-class citizens. You're either a slave or you're free. That's like being a little bit pregnant. It can't happen. The Organization of African American Unity will take those private steps that are necessary to ensure the survival of African American people in the face of racist aggression and the defense of our women and children. We are within our rights to use whatever means necessary. Whatever means necessary. We are in our rights to use whatever means necessary to that end. Needless to say, among this number of people, to include protection of certain inalienable rights that were guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, African people in America have not found ourselves. We Malcolm's words. African Americans feel receptive towards all people of goodwill. We are not opposed to multi-ethnic associations in any walk of life. I'm going to repeat that one more time. We, Afro-Americans, feel receptive towards all people of goodwill. We are not opposed to multi-ethnic associations in any walk of life. In fact, we've had experiences which enable us to understand how unfortunate it is that human beings have been set apart or aside from each other because of characteristics known as racial characteristics. Here, Malcolm is destroying the institution of race. Malcolm says in any walk of life, meaning friendship, meaning love, meaning marriage, meaning neighbors, meaning co-workers. Malcolm says we understand as African people the disgusting nature of race and racial division. And here in 1965, long before my brother Ibram Kendi wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Malcolm is telling us how to be an anti-racist. Can you imagine if you were taught this, Malcolm, in schools? Where would you be if Malcolm told you race was ridiculous? 50 years before people were able to see that race is ridiculous. However, African Americans, Malcolm's words, did not create the prejudice background and atmosphere in which we live. And we must face the facts. A racial society does exist in stark reality and not with equality for Black people. So we who are non-white must meet the problems inherited from centuries of inequalities and deal with the present situations as rationally as we see fit. The exclusive ethnic quality of our unity is necessary. The exclusive ethnic quality of our unity is necessary for self-preservation. We say this because our experiences backed up by history show that African culture and African American culture not be accurately recognized and reported, and cannot be respectfully expressed nor secure in its survival if we remain the divided and therefore helpless victims of an oppressive society. As we close our segment for today, we should all think that if a man don't treat you right, he definitely won't teach you right. We understand that we were labeled super predators, incorrigible, endangered species. We were given all of the deprivation that went with the title of being Black. We were not given the knowledge of our ancient heroes, the Hannibal Barcas, the Al-Mansurs, the Tariq ibn Ziyads. But more than that, we weren't given the knowledge of our present heroes, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Thomas Sankaras, the Malcolm X's. So if a man won't treat you right, he sure won't teach you right. So we have the obligation to teach ourselves. I thank you so very much for allowing me in your homes and your cars, or wherever you may be listening to this message. I thank so much my beautiful sister Q for being on the ones and twos. I thank 99 Jams the Berg. I thank my brother Jab for allowing me to have his seat today. And I leave you as I greeted you in peace. All power to the people.